In today's episode, we are joined by a multiple time founder who is trying to change the game of beverages. He and I get in depth as to the problem that the beverage industry has created, as well as how he and his co founders are solving for it. I was blown away to the point that I was sharing it with my family and my kids that evening, and they were like, how do we go figure this out and support this piece of technology that I genuinely think is going to change the world of beverages? So if you've got a beverage program and want to enhance it, keep listening to the episode. If you've always wanted to add beverages, whether that's alcohol, non alcohol, coffee, check out the show. If you don't know me, my name is Jeremy Julian. I am the Chief Revenue Officer for Custom Business Solutions. We sell the North Star point of sale solution for multiple units. If you don't know who we are, check us out at cbsnorthstar.com. And now on to the episode. Welcome back to the Restaurant Technology Guys podcast. I thank everyone out there for joining us. Today is going to be a fun episode because I love, and you guys have heard this, longtime listeners have heard this, I love listening to entrepreneurs talk about some problem that they found out in the space, because it's amazing how much new technology comes out in the restaurant space every day. And today we're going to get to expose another one of those new pieces of technology. Rishabh, why don't you introduce yourself before we jump into kind of Sidework and what problem you're trying to solve in the space? But where did you come from? A little bit of background for our listeners that may not be familiar with what it is that you guys have been doing.
Of course. Thanks for having me. First off, I grew up outside of Pittsburgh and have always been a builder at heart. I've got a couple co-founders that I've known since fifth or sixth grade, and we were like the classic kids in the back of the classroom. I remember Mrs. Hudeman's class, sixth grade science class. We were working on, I think, the project of the semester there was trying to turn the kinetic energy of oceans into potential energy. Turns out that doesn't work that well, but I've been pretty much building ever since. Went to school at the University of Michigan, graduated, went right into hospitality and hospitality technology at another startup, got addicted to both building companies and specifically building companies for the hospitality space, and has been doing it for my entire career.
I love that. And it's always fun when you can take those learnings from the different places that you had been. Why don't you introduce your new project and where you guys are at today? Because I think, honestly, I'm excited to get into the conversation because I've been doing this close to 30 years in the restaurant tech space, and there's not a whole lot of stuff like what you're building out there. And so every time I turn around, I'm like, there can't be another person that's doing something else in this space. It's got to have all been figured out. But at the end of the day, I think you've got something that's pretty unique, and I want our listeners to hear about it.
Appreciate that. Yeah. At Sidework, we built the world's first agnostic ingredient dispensing system for highly complex beverages. That's a lot of words for a fairly simple concept. So if any of your listeners are Starbucks drinkers or Dunkin' drinkers, and they're getting an iced brown sugar shaken espresso with a couple pumps of this and almond milk, we take that drink and we make it in less than 10 seconds with a dispenser and basically reduce the lift on baristas and drive top lines for beverages for all sorts of businesses.
Talk me through why that was where you guys went, because that seems like a very complex problem to solve. And I love that you guys are solving it. And again, I 100% agree with you. And I think it's going to be one of those things that 30 years from now, we're going to be like, how did anybody stand there and really make these drinks,
Yeah.
especially for some of those things? But talk me through even the ideation process of where this came from.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like a grassroots natural story. Like I said, I started my career in hospitality technology at a company called Gather. We were making event management software. So if you were a restaurant, you want to book out your private room, managing the menus for that private event, all of that stuff. And while we were there, we had an exit event we sold to Vista Equity Partners. But a couple things stuck with me. First, I think you talked about earlier how people are constantly building for restaurants. I agree with that, but I also think that restaurants are very underinvested in, especially when it comes to like top tier, high quality technology. And what I
Agreed.
mean by that is if you look at like the venture capital landscape or the general financial institutions, the going saying is restaurants are bad business, low margins, bad business. Don't invest in restaurants unless you like really love it. All of the cliches around restaurants as a business in general. And if you look at the data on investment in restaurants, especially as it relates to automation and high tech investments, they lag far behind industries like manufacturing, transportation, energy, so on and so forth. But they're like central to the social fabric of what we do. We celebrate our
Mhm.
moments there. We do they are central to everything that we are. And so while I was at Gather, I got a little bit addicted and a little bit of a chip of my shoulder, being like, I don't think restaurants have to be bad business. I think if we invested in them and had the best technology talent, the technology is built sending rocket ships to space or like controlling Amazon warehouse. If we had that, we can make it better business and we can make the people who run those businesses happier, enjoy things more. And so that was the business white space that we saw. The second part of the story is a little bit more natural. While I was working at Gather, me and one of the co-founders who I mentioned, one of the kids, people I grew up with, one of the smartest people I know, we got bartending licenses. We started
Okay.
becoming bartenders. We got certificates, and one thing led to another. And we started building a cocktail dispenser as a passion project, and that snowballed into where we're at today, which is delivering complex drinks across the country for a variety of brands.
Yeah, that's amazing. Why do you think that restaurants are so underinvested in? It's an interesting theory, and I say it often on the show. Restaurants are the second largest employer in the United States behind the government. And
Yeah.
so more people work in restaurants, more people have gotten their startup in restaurants, more
Yep.
people have made their way into restaurants. And quite frankly, I think more youth should work in restaurants because they'd have to deal with the public more and they'd probably be better humans. But in general, they're a very large percentage of the population. And there's so few of them that have it figured out. When you look at some of the other areas of our lives, medical,
Yeah.
they've just gotten so much investment, but restaurants on the other hand, are not. Why do you think that is?
I think it's one big reason. At the unit level, the best restaurants or the best coffee shops are netting a 20% margin. If you
Mhm.
compare that to software companies, I come from a technology world. So when a venture capitalist is looking at making an investment, you're comparing it to things that you know. And when you look at software companies, and I think like the best example of this is the heyday of Google, and Google Ads is an 80% margin product, easily scalable, not physical. And so like you can take that, and if you don't look any deeper with any nuance, it would be 20% versus 80%. Why would I ever park my money in the 20% proposition? But the reason I think that's wrong, and I think the reason why we've got $12 million raised and more coming, is because of what you just said. You've got to, at best case scenario, 20% margin category. The average is hovering around 8 to 13. There's a lot of upside there.
Yep.
And making, like you said, second largest employer, $75 billion a month spent on beverage alone, making a 5 to 10% margin improvement by just investing in technology and building up the foundations of restaurants, that's a big deal. And it's a fairly uncrowded space. And so I think like there's a level of nuance that's been lost in the conversation, which is can you be differentiated and what is the opportunity for upside? And I think investors and builders are coming around to it now because of the things you mentioned. But to me, it's just if I can make restaurants 8% better, at the end of the day, that's a massive value add.
Yep. Especially to a industry that is so instrumental to even the fabric of life in America. The other one that I like to throw out, and I'm probably going to get a little bit of hate mail for this, is there's a lot of people that have been doing restaurants the same way for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think they're very averse to change. Some of that's because tech companies and people that have great ideas aren't able to either get the funding or get execution. And
Yeah.
so everybody is a bit gun shy about taking on some of this. It's the hospitality business after all. How do I keep it hospitable, but also continue to drive the margin stack like you're talking about?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things that have happened. First off, restaurant owners, again, have to a certain extent been offered a bill of goods that hasn't come home.
Hmm.
And it's, we mentioned in the pre show about going to trade shows. When I was at Gather, I went to restaurant trade shows all the time. And it's 15 versions of the same point of sale system, offering you a
Hmm.
slightly better price or a feature that frankly doesn't add to the bottom line. And so I think there's been a lot of try shiny object here, and shiny
Uh-huh.
object's pretty good. But if you switch, and I'll maybe get some hate mail for this, if you switch from toast to square, does your margin really improve? And that's where I think like the first part of this is there has been a lot of innovation and advancement, but are we really looking at the core margins in the restaurant industry? And that sort of leads me to what we're building, which is when you look at beverage, I think not a secret amongst restaurant folks, you get your margin out of beverages. The saying at full service restaurants has always been make your money on liquor, break even on the food. And I think the way we think about it is if we make if we run up the numbers in in beverage, if we make that the highest margin category possible across the venues we work with, it allows you to make mistakes in other places, and it builds up like the I talk about it as like a foundation. You like your bottom line starts off at a higher place, and then the decisions you make from there, the menus and things like the menus, the decor, the ambiance, the service, you can bump up, but your bottom line is higher if you maximize out of beverage. And I think when you look at what we've built, which is effectively complex beverages in a box, it allows you to maximize that beverage profit and actually add to the bottom line.
I'd love for you to click in on that. What does it actually mean? Talk me through the traditional process of building that. I don't know the coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker, but walk me through what a barista needs to
Yeah.
do to make that cappuccino, that espresso, that those different drinks, and then let's talk about what life is different when they work with Sidework and how does that path go? Because
Yeah.
I'm sitting here not as a coffee drinker, and I know coffee is an area that you guys have done well.
Mhm.
Talk me through what does it look like today, and where is life transfer when you guys put your stuff in?
Yeah. I'd actually like to expand on that a little bit too. I would like to talk about what it's like today, but also what it was like 5 years ago and
Okay.
why that makes a big difference, or 10 years ago. So let's 10 years ago or slightly earlier. And let's just use Starbucks as an example because I think it's so if you're looking 10 plus years ago, the most ordered drink at a Starbucks was a Pike Place drip coffee.
Okay.
Super easy to pour. Barista grabs it, pours it, serves it, 30 seconds. The Starbucks is the third place, all of it, right? You fast forward to today, and 70% of Starbucks drinks are cold and complex. And you're using the same baristas, you're the same, it's effectively the same store setups, but the drinks are just a lot harder to make. And so, what I think one of the most popular drinks is an iced brown sugar shaken espresso, which you can customize your milk, your number of pumps of syrup, all of that. So the make process, it's on the cold complex drinks. You're talking about a 7 to 13 step make process on average, and that's get the first thing is how much mental effort you have to go through. You read the ticket and you have to understand what the modifiers mean. So this person's ordered with almond milk. They want light ice. They want 2 extra pumps of brown sugar syrup. What does that mean to the quantities? And that's after at Starbucks, a barista training is 41 and a half hours over 30 days. So you've got all of that knowledge in your head. And most of it is around how to make drinks. And that's just base recipes. And now you take the base recipes and customers can do whatever they want to those base recipes. And you're basically doing algorithms in your head now. Okay, light ice means I increase the quantity by this. Adding those 2 pumps mean this. And now the new recipe is being computed in your head to a certain extent.
Uh-huh.
Then the make process starts. Then it's bend over, grab the right type of milk, fill it, go over to the syrup pump station, one, two, three, four of this, one, two of that, down to the espresso station, pour the espresso shot, put everything together, mix it with ice, shake it, and serve it. And you have a drink. Now you do that 250 times a day.
Yeah. And it's baffling to me. I'm going to ask to stop right here just because I'm baffled that you said, I don't know, 70%, 70 plus percent
Or
of
cold.
beverages are modified. That is crazy talk. And the funny part is I have two women in my life that enjoy their Starbucks and
Yeah.
they modify the crap out of what it is. Quite
Yeah.
frankly, they're at a place now where they just order on the app because half the time when they tell the cashier, they don't get what they want. And so they order on the app because they realize that it's in there the way that they do it. I'm going to tell a quick story. We built a point of sale solution years ago where it was kiosk at the table well before kiosk was a thing. And so we were
Mhm.
putting kiosks at the table, and at a restaurant like a Chili's, it was less than 20% of the orders were modified. And similar to the Starbucks example, they were getting to 70, 75% of those orders were modified because you know what? When I go to Chili's and I order a burger, and I don't like tomatoes, I realize tomatoes come on the side. I'm not going to worry about telling the server to don't put tomatoes on there. Whereas when I can do it on a kiosk, I can take the
Oh
tomatoes
yeah.
off, and now it creates this level of complexity for both the expo as well as the guy that's producing the food. It was
Oh,
it
yeah.
they changed the world of how they were doing that order of operation. So I think what you're saying is, I guess, just very eye opening to me, just because, again, I'm not a coffee drinker. So I didn't necessarily even know that was such a big piece of what it
Yeah.
is that they do.
And I'm gonna get to how we solve that in a second, but you nailed the nailed it on the head there. And it's not just coffee, whether it's cocktails at full service restaurants, beverages in general, consumer demands are through the roof. And the on premise is being driven by the off premise. The grocery
Mm,
aisle of beverage has never looked better.
yep.
Flavored sparkling waters, kombuchas, coffees, all in a can, all your favorite thing. In most restaurants you go to, is like a Coke and Diet Coke still. And the other thing you hit on the head is, as soon as those apps started coming out, the order ahead apps, and those options were there so clearly displayed, the options that were always behind the screen somewhere on the point of sale system, this thing really took off. In fact, I was talking to a very senior executive at one of the larger, fastest growing coffee brands in the country. And in a moment of weakness, he told me that they're all in a race to the death with Starbucks. But when it
Mhm.
comes to complexity, they all have to do the order ahead apps. They all have to let you choose the syrups, the milks. Starbucks has set that standard. The toothpaste is out of the tube, and you have to do it now.
But
And
once you put it in the hands of the consumers, they are gonna modify it,
they're going to
because
modify.
they never my wife, again, she goes and gets a margarita. You know what? She says, "I'll have a house margarita with salt, not sugar or whatever. On the rocks with salt," is her drink.
Yeah,
But if she got a choice of 27 different tequilas, she
yeah.
might choose a different one each time, which, to your point, because you're putting it in the hands of the consumers, they're gonna modify it every time.
And now with Sidework, you get this order, this cold, complicated order with whatever modifiers. We built a layer of software intelligence. In an instant, it understands. Light ice means I increase the volume by this. Two extra pumps. The Starbucks rules for that is it's zero point 0.5 ounces each. If they've paid for it, if they want to split their pumps, they can split their pumps too. All of that's done in an instantaneous second. Every non espresso ingredient in that drink, you take that cup to our machine, you press a button, you hit dispense, everything's dispensed accurately to 1/10 of an ounce in about 10 seconds. You add espresso and ice to that drink and you serve it and you're good to go. You took that 7 to 13 step make process, you turn into three a lot less physically intensive steps, and you took all of the processing power out of it. And I think that's, you know, we've got a misnomer in the industry now, especially in fast casual and in cafes. We call them service industry employees, but at their peak hours, if you're a barista at Starbucks, you're not a service employee. It's a manufacturing
It's
job
a manufacturing.
masquerading as a service job. You're there to make drinks, and the more the customer customizes, the more that ticket size goes up, and the more ticket size, the more profits. And you make drinks, you make those drinks across 8 hours, and it's not a service job. There's no hi, hello. There's no how's your day. I've got 15 tickets waiting for me.
Yep,
And
I might as well be on the Ford production line turning a wrench, because it's about the same.
And I tie that back to when we talk about investment and underinvestment. You know what's gotten a ton of investment? Manufacturing automation.
Yeah.
And if we're going to turn these cafes into mini manufacturing plants, we might as well give people the tools to make their lives easier.
Love that. So let's talk a little bit about how you do that. So you went through it pretty high level, and I want to dig in a little bit deeper. So take
Yeah.
these complex drinks. Let's talk about what you talked about, where it was 10 years ago. You talked about the modification and the ability for humans to customize. When they customize, it makes the job more complex.
Yeah.
Again, going back to, I remember Scion, which was a Toyota brand. You could only get it the way that they made it, because it was very easy. They could just cookie cutter it. Anymore, now you've got 27 different options as it relates to that, and whether you charge for it, you don't charge for it. What is it that you're automating? Is it the flavors? Is it the coffee? Is it the let's just stay on the coffee train, and maybe we can pivot to mixed drinks at some point too.
Yeah.
But I'd love to talk coffee first, just because I know it's
Let's
a pretty big area.
Yeah, let's talk coffee first. But I do want to get to at some point is all the brands that don't have complex beverages on their menu and how they're leaving a lot of money on the table
Yep.
just because of how operationally difficult it is. But sticking with coffee and how it works, we don't have pictures in front of us. I'll try to walk you through it as best as I can. So imagine you've got a 4 foot wide, 2 foot deep machine. It's got two
Mhm.
drawers. That's a fridge. In those drawers, in the native containers all these ingredients come in, you've got a bunch of ingredients plugged in upside down. You've got gallons of whole milk, cartons of oat milk, you've got liter bottles of Tarani syrup and Monin syrup. Everything's plugged into the machine, 36 ingredients in the fridge, 8 that you can pump in from external, like bags and boxes of syrups, cold brew, anything that's shelf stable. You have all of those ingredients stocked that are those brands' ingredients. And I think that is like a lot of our technological advancement is whatever the brand's serving. We've got a small chain of restaurants in Arizona that does a homemade raspberry puree with seeds in it. Your oat milk. Like we don't demand anything out of your menu. We can dispense anything. So you've got all of this stocked up. You've got an order comes in, goes through our software. Our software understands the order, has our own intelligence built into it. It's you've got your let's go back to the brown sugar shaken espresso that we've talked to death about here. And so now our machine knows, okay, it's going to get whatever the milk is. My choice is almond milk. So it's a 16-ounce strength. That means the total volume is going to be 8 ounces. It's going to get 2 ounces of espresso. That's going to tell the barista to add on the ticket. It's going to get 4 ounces of almond milk, 2 ounces, an ounce and a half of brown sugar syrup, and an ounce and a half of simple syrup. The machine has all of that information now. And now you go to a proprietary and fairly like complex system of sensors and pumps. They get that data, you pump all of that out, takes about 10 seconds. Everything mixes as it's coming out. So you're getting a better mixed beverage too. But in about 10 seconds, those pumps and sensors are done, and you've got a cup with all of the ingredients. You add espresso and you serve it.
Wow. That's incredible. And so for those that are naysayers, and I do want to get to the point about where is the opportunity for those that aren't anywhere close to this. For those that are the naysayers that say, how is a robot, how is a computer, how is this thing going to do it, as
Yeah.
well as the barista that's been there for 10 years and knows my people and knows what I want to do? Because we all know this. We're technologists. I realize that a computer can do it more consistently and better than a human can. But for those that are going to say, "Wow, you're going to put somebody out of a job," they're not going to know how to do those things.
Yeah.
Give me some fodder to go back to those people that says, "No, you're crazy."
Let's first off, they're not crazy because at first look, automation takes away jobs. I'm there too. I want to talk about this in two ways. Let's talk about it with some numbers, and let's talk about it with just the general barista and guest experience. The numbers are this: it's getting really hard to run a coffee shop. So as you
Mhm.
look today, or any sort of restaurant, 50% of jobs in the hospitality industry remain unfilled. It's even worse. It's even worse in cafes. On average, 130% of restaurants are turning over their staff every year. Some of the coffee shops we work with, it's 100% a quarter. Since 2020, ingredient costs are up 29%. All of that is on a backdrop of what we talked about earlier. 70+% of Starbucks drinks are now cold and complex. So in a increasingly tightening macroeconomic like environment, consumers are demanding more and more. And by the way, their wallets have been hurt too over the past few years. So they're demanding it at a
Yeah.
cheaper price point. And so my first question is, what do you want the coffee shop owner to do? What do you want the
Mhm.
manager to do that has to make their P&L like work at the end of the day? And at a broader level, like one of the missions that we have here is we want baristas, managers, owners, bartenders, managers, owners, staff members, managers, owners. We want them to be just as happy as the people dining at their place. And
Mhm.
that isn't happening today. It's a really stressful job to manage or operate a Starbucks right now. And I think like you've seen already, especially at the big chains, but even at the mom and pop level, I've seen it with our own customers, closures over the past 5 years, a
Yep.
lot of closures. So let's have a little bit of a nuanced discussion. It's not just labor jobs. Like we've got restaurants closing and margins thinning. Like we've all got to pull up our sleeves and get to work a little bit to
Yeah.
make it a little bit more protected. But I think the numbers tell a lot of that story. I think what's more important is the barista and guest experience. And we already talked about it with the Starbucks person. When you go to get a job as a barista or Starbucks, I don't think you expect the physicality and the mental stress you go through on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, the
And,
grind. It's a
and
grind,
there's
man.
Yeah,
I watched it. I watched it when I went with my daughter. I was like, "This is insane." And the
yeah,
amount of patience that guests have for not having their coffee when they want it, the way
yeah,
they want it, or if it shows up wrong, they just
yeah.
go ballistic on people, and it's so silly.
And so what I'd ask the people who are having this argument is like, are we looping in the baristas? Are the baristas saying no to tools and automation? Are they asking to make 250 drinks by hand every day? Are they asking to have to do math on every order? Is that who is begging for that? And uh, on top of that, I think there's some like what's really important to us as we think about growing this company are what are the lines between the person, the machine, the guest, all of that stuff. And so we talked about the Starbucks order. We're not touching the pulling the espresso shot. That's coffee. We're dispensing the milks, the syrups, we're making sure everything's accurate, everything's happening quickly. You're still getting an espresso shot. You're still getting the finishes at the end. You're still if you have a regular, you're still getting that conversation. Why are we so insistent on having people bend over, pick up milk, and pour the right amount of milk 300 times a day? Who is that proving? What is that proving to who?
What is
Like,
that gonna get for you at
yeah,
the end of the day, right?
why are we so insistent on protecting that? And that flows all the way through the guest experience. Like, I think the best abstraction for our company, the way we think about it, is if the barista's experience is improved, that means the shop is going to be more profitable and the guest experience is going to be better. And
Absolutely.
like I we have it on our websites. I don't make any bones about it. I think like Sidework does make baristas more effective in making drinks. It does. About 3 times more effective as the studies show. But I think the ways in which we make them more effective add to the experience and take away the physical and mental pain that go into being a barista. And I think there's a level of nuance that sometimes gets lost in the labor automation conversation that isn't happening in other industries, and it's
Mhm.
hurting us industry wide.
And at the end of the day, the guest is also gonna get what they ordered more
Yeah,
consistently in a way that they're gonna be happier with the product. Before we jump into the opportunity to add this to a group that doesn't have it, how does this translate to a place that has a full bar that's doing mixed drinks? Is it a very similar process? Because
there's
again, you were a bartender, how you said, "Hey, I gotta go solve this problem," but in a very busy bar, it's not a whole lot different than a barista at a Starbucks. The
yeah,
amount of complexity and the amount of whiskeys you have and bourbons you have and what you're
yeah,
mixing them with and all of what that looks like. Is it
yeah.
the same idea?
It is. I think this is actually a great transition to talk about like value props to different types of places. And I think it's like vertical wide. So you have your busy coffee shops and your busy bars where it's the same idea. You're talking about speed, throughput, stress on labor, like just accuracy, all of those things. But there's a couple other doors we haven't explored yet. One is you are a busy bar, but your lunch shift isn't busy at all. And
Mhm.
being a bartender and talking to bartender, you know what the hardest lunch shift to staff is? It's the bartending shift at a Buffalo Wild Wings on a Tuesday afternoon.
Mhm.
Nobody is signing up for that shift. It's a loss leader in terms of revenue per labor hours, that shift. And so I think there's an element to we solve for the busy times, but we also solve for the dead times because now a waiter can get a cocktail from the machine. A waiter
Mhm.
can get a complex beverage. And so that's like the second value prop. And then third, and I think this is the big one that gets hidden behind all this. You have the people that have existing complex beverages, but then you also have large brands with little to no beverage menus, Sweet
Yeah.
Green, Kava, Insomnia Cookies, so on and so forth, where the profit from beverage is zero. It's like you can get a bottled Coke or a can of Spindrift. It isn't specialized. It isn't unique to the brand. Nobody's ordering it. And there's a large white space there. And I get the reasons, right? Beverage is an entirely different category. And if you want to go specialty, it's more labor, it's more training, it's more operational costs. And one of the things that we've done is we've enabled basically in a very low cost way those brands to start getting margins and profits from beverage to boost their business. But we've also done that with the coffee shops and the bars and restaurants. I'll give you 2 examples. One with Gregory's Coffee in New York City. One of the things that has been a common theme throughout this is consumers demanding more, labor is sticky, and they're getting fed up, right? And one of the things is new menu categories. So
Yep.
Gregory's has been wanting to put refreshers on the menu for a long time, but the baristas didn't have the bandwidth to add an entire new make process, menu category, all that stuff. After getting their machines, they added refreshers to their menu. Refreshers now make up 24% of their cold sales, a category that they
Wow.
didn't have last year. Similarly, we work with a restaurant chain in Arizona. Their coffee menu consisted, and they're on like a college campus. Their menu consisted of black coffee, iced coffee. Those were their like lunch, brunch coffee drinks. We partnered with La Colombe Coffee. We gave them a coffee menu. They had a machine for the cocktails already, so it was just adding a couple recipes in. $1,500 more in profit per month by having complex coffees on the menu.
That's
And
incredible.
now, and you transfer that to the brands that have no like custom complex beverages, and you start to see how this snowballs. We're going to make existing brands a lot more profitable and efficient, but we're also going to bring the brands that don't have complex beverage menus that are custom to their brand. And I see this every day, and I don't, for the life of me, don't understand it. You're like a sweet cream, for example. You go through the painstaking process of having every detail thought of in your food menu, the flavors, the sourcing, and then you pair that with a can of Coke
Mhm.
or an Olipop. There is so much white space there to drive up profits and make the experience better for the guest. I the my like take home message for this. I call people the double stoppers, and I was a double stopper. I used to
Mhm.
work in Philly, and I used to go to Sweet Green 2 to 3 times for a week for lunch and go to Starbucks right after. And why can't I get my coffee at Sweetgreen that matches my food? And that I think is a digestible way to understand what the opportunity is for some of these other brands. And so whether you're a high volume place with complex beverages, a low volume place for complex beverages, or a place without any complex beverages, we have a way to help the bottom line.
And I was going to tag on top of that the fact that most times preventing people from doing it is the complexity, is the training, is the onboarding, is the staffing, is the menu creation and the menu management. So the fact
Yep.
that you guys are allowing people to do that. One last thing that I continue to hear about, and I'd love just your take on it, is non traditional. We keep hearing more and more brands going non traditional, whether that's on a college campus, whether that's at the bottom of a high rise, whether
Yep.
that's in a hospital environment.
Yep.
Talk to me about how Sidework could help people with a non-traditional environment to grow sales in those areas without having to have a full staff of baristas in that environment.
Yeah. Let's start broadly. You've got a lot of really good concepts at I think what I call like the cusp of growth. Maybe they're starting their franchise program. They just did their FDD. They're getting to their 20th or 30th store. They were regional, but now they're going nationwide or they're going non-traditional. And I think the biggest risk in that sort of like valley of death of companies that want to start expanding nationwide but have to get across the chasm is quality control, especially if
Yep.
like a beverage brand. I think day one, we're a solve for that problem. We just did it with Gregory's from 3 states to 20 states. They don't have to be worried if they're New York City based that the drinks in Mission Viejo, California taste different than the drinks that people might have tasted in Manhattan. Like we've got that consistency problem solved from day one. But as you talk specifically about the non-traditionals, that's where a lot of like the growth comes from. Gregory's and mall kiosks. We've got a brand, Coffee Republic, that we just started working with that's going in the bottom of high rises, doing a cafe during the day, cocktails during the night concept. And I think it's unique, but it's also non-unique in this way. As you get further non-traditional, further past traditional, or as you expand further from your home base, the biggest challenge is the supply of specialized labor and also the quality of specialized labor. And as you sort of reduce the need for like highly trained bartenders, for example, you
Yep.
can make it easier to go into those places. And that's not to say that you reduce the need for labor in general. One of the things I learned really early on, we had this is a small mom and pop shop, an owner that's really forward thinking. He told me, I think 3 to 4 years ago, when we used to hire bartenders, we're looking for people with the perfect pour, we're looking for this, we're looking for that. now I can hire great personalities
Yeah.
and just have them run the shop. And maybe I'm not allowed to say this in the podcast, but he said when we had to hire that way, we were hiring a lot of asshole bartenders. But now I can hire good people, smart people, like great personalities. Maybe they don't have a ton of bartending experience, but the portioning of drinks is being done by your machine. And it just, in a lot of ways, whether it's going to non-traditional, expanding nationwide, it makes that expansion a lot easier because it changes your hiring needs.
It reminds me often of the fact that everybody has this fear factor of things that, oh, I was teasing my kids the other day about the fact that I used to have to take a paper map and print it before I was going anywhere.
Yeah.
Now, did those companies suddenly go out of business? No, my life got better. And so now you give the barista 3 times more time back. You're going to have a happier person that's going to spend more time with the guests, telling them about how awesome the coffee is that they're serving them, and not necessarily just being in this place where they're frustrated because they had to go get another gallon of milk out of the walk-in for the 10th time because it dropped off the floor, whatever it might have been.
Yeah.
So where do people learn more? Because this, honestly, like I said at the onset, I'm blown away with what you guys have built. I I'm excited to see the growth because I do see it as a huge game changer for people that are in a place where, quite frankly, it's a huge problem. And you guys are scratching an itch for people that it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of other options out there, if there are any. So, how do people learn more? What would the engagement look like if they were to connect with your team and learn more about how they could automate some of these pieces within their business?
Yeah. First, you can start our website, sidework.co. You can book a demo or a menu consultation. We're always happy to chat. We get the technology is new. We get that you probably haven't seen it before. We can walk you through it. You can follow us on our socials on Instagram and LinkedIn. And then more broadly, my email is Rishabh@sidework.co. I'm always open to chat future of restaurant industry, how all this plays together. I think we've got, you said this in your sign off, it's a huge itch and we've got some problems to solve. I think we're making a fairly large investment at this company at bringing like high quality technology solutions to the largest problems. And I'm always happy to talk to anybody about that.
Love that. And one thing I'll remind our listeners, if this is something that you are trying to solve, you don't necessarily have to buy their solution to talk with them. Rashad will help you through some of this process. And eventually I think you're going to need to figure it out. And as I say, oftentimes, if you're not doing it, your neighbor's doing it. And ultimately he's got a leg up on you if you haven't already checked it out. So I know for our listeners that have been listening to the show for a long time, many of them have contacted me offline and said, you know what? I'm so glad you had so and so on the show because I wouldn't have been able to get to where I need to get to grow my brand. So, Rishabh, thank you so much for not only being on the show, but for creating something that ultimately is making people's lives better. Because I love entrepreneurs that go out and solve problems that make the world a better place so that restaurants can thrive. So, thank you for that.
Appreciate that, Jeremy. Let's all try to make our neighborhood restaurant manager just as happy as our neighborhood restaurant diner.
Love it. And for our listeners, guys, you guys have got lots of choices. So, thank you guys for hanging out with us. If you haven't already subscribed to the show, please do so and make it a great day.